What if a voice had changed your life forever? Imagine this for a second, a whisper that pierces your routine, an insistent intuition, a calm command that comes from the silence, and that, little by little, changes everything around you. Today, you will hear real stories, testimonies of people who claim to have decided to follow Mary's voice. Stories that became the true test of faith for those who lived them. This isn't theory, it's not internet trivia. These are lives transformed, families restored, painful choices that opened doors to a peace no one else could explain. Have you ever been there? Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover may surprise you and stir something deep within you. In these testimonies, which echo directly from the practices and experiences linked to Medjugorje, small, persistent signs appear: a recurring dream, an inner call to pray, a change of path that seemed meaningless until the fruits began to appear. Throughout the video, we'll connect these testimonies to the so-called 7 unrevealed messages of Medjugorje, not to memorize words, but to understand how a spiritual calling can translate into concrete acts of conversion, family protection, prayer, and inner vigilance. Hearing someone tell how they lost their job, were discredited by relatives, or endured nights of doubt and yet found a new horizon is a kind of test that doesn't fit into theological arguments or debates. It's the test of faith in practice. We're not seeking sensationalism here. We're listening, with respect and attention, to those who decided to obey a voice that called for silence, fasting, prayer, and life change, and who ultimately found visible signs of reconciliation, healing, and direction. These accounts require discernment, and we'll talk about it because following Mary's voice, according to dozens of testimonies, isn't a shortcut or a promise of an easy path. It's a process that tests intimacy, character, and purpose. At the same time, the fruits appear: families that have started talking again, marriages that have been rebuilt, simple decisions that have opened unexpected doors. And if you're wondering if this is just something from other times or other people, pay attention. Many of these experiences happen in everyday life, between the kitchen sink and the bedroom, in small choices that, together, begin to shape a new destiny. I'll bring direct voices, raw emotions, and also a sensitive reading of the messages circulating around Medjugorje so you can perceive patterns, signs, and, above all, learn to discern what an authentic calling might be. Don't expect ready-made answers or magical promises. Expect stories that test your own capacity to believe, forgive, and act. And, if deep down, you've always been curious about what it truly means to obey a spiritual calling, this video is for you. Now, without further ado, let's hear the first testimony. A family who decided to respond to the voice, faced disbelief, and ended up finding something that no amount of money or human advice could offer. And that's precisely why the story that follows deserves your full attention. Now, before we dive into this first story and, while your heart begins to open to what comes next, I wanted to ask you something sincere. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below with what touched you most. Or, if you've experienced something similar, share your experience. Reading what you experienced helps those just arriving understand that we're not talking about theories, but about real people who had the courage to listen and respond. Your participation here isn't just a number. It's a testimony that adds strength to other voices and allows stories of faith to reach those who need to hear them. If this video resonates with you, please like it. A like is a simple but powerful sign that this content is valuable and worth sharing. And if you want to continue following stories like this, in-depth insights into the 7 messages of Medjugorje and conversations about discernment and spiritual protection, subscribe to the channel. That's how we can maintain this work and reach more families in need of hope. I promise to read each comment carefully, and whenever it makes sense, I'll ask questions that will help us grow together. Now, come back with me. Let's hear the story of that family who, one ordinary morning, received a calling and made a decision that would change everything. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. And to do so, we need to calmly understand the context in which these voices emerge. Medjugorje is, for many, a meeting place between the human and what they call the supernatural, a simple village that, for decades, has become the scene of persistent reports of apparitions and messages that have transformed the daily lives of those who heard them. When we speak of the 7 unrevealed messages, we are not here to repeat dogma or sell miracles. We are dealing with a collection of themes that appear frequently in local testimonies, in pilgrims' accounts, in conversations with spiritual guides, and in texts documenting contemporary experiences. These messages, in the language of the people who received or heard them, touch on central points of life: true conversion, constant prayer, protection of the family, inner vigilance, fasting and penance, reconciliation, and service toward peace. Saying this is not concluding an argument, it is pointing to patterns that recur in the stories of transformation that I want you to experience firsthand. The stories we hear, some simple, others filled with pain, have something in common. They don't come as external, distant orders, but as intimate invitations that demand decisions. And that's where the word decisions comes in with all the weight it deserves. A decision might be changing a daily route to visit someone, choosing to dedicate 10 extra minutes to prayer, saying I'm sorry when pride demands silence, or even closing the door to a toxic relationship. For those who experienced these changes, they operated like small levers that, together, shifted entire structures of life: employment, marriage, emotional health, family relationships. This is practical transformation, the mindset that begins to prioritize inner silence, listening, and acting in alignment with what is perceived as hidden truth, not in the conspiratorial sense, but as what was there, hidden, waiting to be experienced. Local testimonies lend credibility because they are multifaceted. They don't come from just one source, nor just from those who have visited the place once. They come from neighbors, from families who accompany the visionaries, from priests who have accompanied pilgrimages, from doctors who have seen behavioral changes in patients who adopted practices of prayer and fasting, and from ordinary people whose lives have been reordered by what they call a call. This convergence independent accounts pointing to similar effects is one of the reasons why many listeners pay attention. Still, there is always a need for discernment. Not every account is the same, nor does every experience translate into a universal message. The authority here is multiple and humble: accounts, pastoral accompaniment, and signs of fruit, inner peace, charity. Ethical change are ways to validate, in practice, what was experienced. When I say revelations, I'm not referring to instant solutions. Revelations, in the lives of the people we're about to hear, have faces and consequences. A mother who returned to family prayer and saw her son grow closer. A man who abandoned a path that consumed him and found a new calling of service. A couple who, through the practice of forgiveness, rebuilt their dialogue. These results are the tangible impact, the practical proof many people use to say that something greater, however named, was at work in that process. The journey is not linear. There are setbacks, doubts, nights of anguish, criticism from those who don't understand, and pain that seems meaningless. But there are also episodes of clarity, dreams that guide, faces that appear in moments of decision, and small coincidences that reverberate like signals. At the heart of this movement is a constant invitation to vigilance, cultivating a mindset of presence and openness, the courage to make decisions that may be unpopular, and the humility to seek advice. This is where discernment takes shape. Discerning isn't just about accepting or rejecting. It's about testing the fruits, talking to spiritual guides, confronting feelings with reality, and verifying whether actions produce peace, charity, and growth. It's also about looking behind the scenes at one's own motivations. Does the decision stem from a desire for fame, attention, or sincere transformation? These kinds of questions are part of the process and frequently appear in the stories. Here. At the same time, there is an undeniable community dimension. These voices do not manifest in a vacuum. Family protection, for example, is presented not only as physical protection, but as an ongoing spiritual work involving habits, small practices, and shared decisions. The transformation many families report is not the result of an isolated event, but of daily changes of prayer routine, a gesture of humility, a reorientation of priorities. This brings to light the idea that faith, when proven, materializes in discipline, repeated choices, and a new way of seeing the world. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. I want you to realize that these stories, beyond being moving, teach a mindset that truth can require practical courage. They're not just pretty words. They're concrete actions that redefine destiny and character. And as I invite you to pay close attention, notice the subtle signs, small changes, interrupted conversations that turn into reconciliations, nights of silence that precede significant decisions. These are the clues that help us separate what is mere feeling from what can constitute a real calling. Comment: that makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, and I begin by telling the story of that family as if you were in the room with us, hearing every breath, every pause, every gesture that preceded the change. Heartbeat, held breath. It was an ordinary morning when the mother, Maria *, first felt something different. It wasn't a loud voice, nor a dramatic command. It was a faint impression, as if someone, from within, were asking her to turn off the television and gather the family around the table. She hesitated. There were bills to pay, work awaiting her, the routine that seemed immutable. But the persistence of that feeling was greater. That day, during a break between coffees, she called her husband and children and simply asked, "Let's pray together for 5 minutes." The request sounded simple, almost ridiculous to someone who lives in a hurry. But there was something different in her gaze, a serenity that clashed with the fear that followed. The husband, who had been skeptical until then, looked at his eldest daughter with a forced smile. "Just 5 minutes," he said, and his daughter rolled her eyes. A subtle sound of chair pushing, shallow breathing. However, during those minutes of prayer, something changed. The daughter began to cry, not from immediate sadness, but from a flood of memories that surfaced, a memory of when, years before, She and her father had fought over a mistake that was never truly repaired. The words didn't heal everything in that instant, of course, but they did open a crack. The husband apologized. It was small, hesitant, almost inaudible, and the daughter responded with a hug that lingered longer than anyone expected. This, to the neighbors who heard about it later, seemed insignificant. To them, it was the first sign that something bigger might be at work in the small decisions. In the following days, there were discrete signs, encounters that seemed A neighbor knocked on the door, just when the mother needed advice. A letter arrived with an old piece of advice she needed to read. A recurring dream returned at night with the same image, a path lit by a row of small candles. These coincidences, which to some would consider mere chance, took the form of clues in the family's life. The transformation came not by a grand miracle, but by a sequence of decisions. The family began to set aside time together. Arguments began to include breaks to listen. Pride gave way to simple questions like, "I'm sorry, and will you forgive me?" Gradually, the house that had previously breathed tension began to breathe peace. There was resistance. The mother faced criticism from relatives who found this new behavior strange. Her husband missed hours of work because he decided to attend a training program that brought him closer to the community, and this caused a financial scare. Their youngest daughter, who was studying abroad, was skeptical. Is this serious? Isn't it just acting? But the persistence of small choices, the prayers, the gestures of humility, the sincere conversations accumulated a kind of spiritual capital that, over time, became tangible protection. One episode illustrates this. On a stormy night, when a short circuit could have started a fire, the husband woke in the middle of the night, feeling strange, and went to pull a fuse. Shortly afterward, a neighbor reported that a spark had stalled the family car, which could have caused a disaster at any other time. For them, this was more than luck. It was confirmation that something was moving the invisible gears in the family's favor. When telling this story in the first person, retold with the intimacy of someone who heard it from the protagonist's own hearts, it's impossible to ignore the fear factor. Fear of the unknown, fear of others' laughter, fear of the practical consequences. The mother confessed, in an almost whispered tone, that she felt like giving up many times. Sound of deep breathing. What if I'd made a mistake? What if I'd brought shame on the family? She wondered. But it was precisely the courage to continue even in the face of fear that paved the way for reconciliation. Courage, in this case, wasn't the absence of fear. It was acting despite it, choosing small practices that, together, transformed daily life. The healing the family experienced was neither immediate nor complete. Scars, painful memories, and a history of indelible loss remained, but the impact was real and measurable. Dialogue, previously rarefied, gained depth. Decisions that seemed insignificant began to build a new pattern. Faith ceased to be a distant concept and became a tool for action. The protection they reported feeling was not a promise that nothing bad would happen from then on, but the feeling that there was a new alignment in their lives, a kind of compass that guided choices and reduced the likelihood of radical ruptures. Not all the changes were easy or quick. There were setbacks, nights when silence gripped and it seemed everything would return to the way it was. And it was in this back and forth that the family learned to appreciate the behind-the-scenes aspects of transformation, the small habits maintained when no one is looking, the repeated decisions that strengthen character, and the humility to seek help when one's own heart fails. They realized that the journey is not a straight line, but a series of cycles where each setback can be an opportunity to consolidate what has been achieved. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because this family's story reveals a pattern that recurs in other accounts we've heard. Hidden truth often presents itself not as a heavenly decree, but as a call to practical courage, decisions that affect routine, mindset, and relationships. This lesson makes us consider what we're willing to change in our lives to protect what matters most. The transformation we observe doesn't eliminate doubts. It demands integration, faith that translates into action, belief that becomes discipline, prayer that transforms into an active presence in the home. As you reflect on this, remember the small choices in your daily life, those that seem unimportant but have the power to redefine destinies. Think about the decisions you've been putting off, the words left unsaid, the simplest actions that can protect those you love. If this story touched you, if it somehow brought back memories or inspired a desire for change, comment below. On this journey too, now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. And to do so, I bring you the story of Anna *, a woman whose life seemed to fit a predictable script until the day a decision changed everything. It was night when she received the news. The company where she worked had decided to close its branch, and the position that supported her family simply ceased to exist. In the darkness of her room, breathing rapidly and the phone still in her hand, Anna felt a strange sensation, not just the immediate panic of loss, but as if a soft, almost internal voice suggested to her that this could be the beginning of something else. We used to think of darkness as a metaphor for loss, but that night, the silence brought, along with the fear, an opportunity for choice. Losing her job was, For her, the first crack that let the light in. What came next wasn't an instant miracle. There was turmoil, bills to reorganize, looks from relatives who didn't understand Anna's decision to take a deliberate break, rumors about her professionalism that tarnished her reputation. There was shame. There were tough questions. Someone wondered if she hadn't acted impulsively, if she wasn't seeking attention with spiritual gestures. But Anna began to respond with small, firm decisions. Instead of accepting the rush of a new job that would pull her back into the same mindset that was draining her, she chose a time of silence and listening, not as an escape, but as a process of renewal. The transformation began in that intimate space, readings that touched the soul, frank conversations with trusted friends, and a prayer routine she had never managed to maintain before. Little by little, the dawn gave way to the dawn within her. Anna's journey illustrates something that appears in many accounts. Loss exposes hidden truths, removes masks, and reveals what truly matters. The hidden truth that emerged in her case wasn't a sensational supernatural secret, but a practical insight into priorities. What she had sacrificed in the name of security had cost her inner peace. By choosing to give up the fear of starting over, she gained something else, a mindset of service and creativity that led her to reinvent her work. Instead of seeking a job that would fit her into old formulas, she began using dormant talents to set up a small project supporting families in the community, uses prayer meetings, and practical support for those experiencing hardship. This new path had a real impact, not only a source of income more aligned with her values, but a sense of purpose that transformed the way she related to the world. The revelations Anna experienced behind the scenes of her life were subtle and, at the same time, powerful. There were days when she doubted herself and even what she perceived as her calling. There were criticisms, closed doors, and nights when the weight seemed unbearable. However, by maintaining a discipline of small decisions, getting up early to write, attending to someone in need, maintaining honest dialogue at home, her reputation, initially shaken, was rebuilt on more solid foundations: character, service, and constancy. These repeated choices functioned like small bricks that, added together, built a new foundation. The transformation that came did not eliminate the scars of loss, but it changed the narrative. Instead of a victim of circumstances, Anna became the protagonist of a journey that had meaning and direction. There's also a community aspect that deserves attention. Anna's resignation, far from isolating, ended up bringing her closer to people who, like her, were seeking concrete answers and practical support. The project she founded brought together families, volunteers, and local leaders. And from this network emerged a protection that wasn't magical, but the fruit of collective decisions, regular meetings, the exchange of material support in critical moments, group prayer, and small acts of mercy. The impact of these attitudes on daily life was visible. Homes that re-established dialogue, young people who found healthy alternatives, neighbors who began to care for one another. The protection that many report when they follow a voice perceived as true appears here as a consequence of a renewed mindset, a change in habits that favors community life. It's important to emphasize that following a voice, in the stories we hear, requires courage to lose. Not all losses are converted into material gains. Some result only in inner peace or a new way of seeing the world. In Anna's case, the gain was multiple: peace, purpose, and a sense of purpose that seemed missing. But she also paid the price. Nights of insecurity, separation from people who didn't understand her choices, and the constant need to exercise decisions that contradict the tendency to seek immediate security. This tension between loss and rebirth is paradoxically the lifeblood of these stories. The real impact comes when the person accepts ambivalence and continues. Even without guarantees, the metaphor of dawn is apt because it illustrates well how the process unfolds. The night doesn't end suddenly. There is a progression, an active waiting. The mindset that leads to rebirth is not passive. It requires discipline, practice, and a willingness to face what appears behind the scenes, the doubts, the judgments, the mistakes. And often, this behind-the-scenes work is invisible to outsiders. This is why the narrative of a new beginning often seems dramatic when told in a few minutes, but is, in reality, a sum of decisions repeated over time. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because understanding the journey of those who lost to gain gives us clues about how hidden truth reveals itself in practical life, not as a spectacular event, but as a pattern of choices that alter mindsets and generate impact. These stories invite us to rethink what we value and to ask, what small decisions have I been avoiding out of fear? What loss, if embraced courageously, could open a door to something greater in my life? As you reflect on this, realize that it's not about romanticizing suffering, but about recognizing that renunciation can be a legitimate path to transformation. And as we breathe with this thought, notice the signs that accompany change: dreams that return, conversations that heal wounds, gestures of humility that restore trust. These are clues, not guarantees. And it's in this space of clues that many people decide to act. These accounts have common patterns. Let's find out what they are. Comment, That makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. And to do so, we need to pay close attention to the patterns that recur in the stories. We hear not as ready-made formulas, but as guiding principles that help us understand where the hidden truth often appears. If you pay attention, you'll notice that these stories share elements that function like a map: silence, fasting and prayer, small signs, and persistence. These aren't magic ingredients. They are habits and dispositions that, when cultivated, change mindsets and produce a real impact on daily life. And it is precisely in this sum of details, behind the scenes of choices, that transformation takes shape. Silence frequently appears in narratives as a necessary space for listening. It's not a passive silence, but an active silence, one you intentionally seek, one you create. It might mean turning off the radio on your way to work, going 10 extra minutes without your cell phone before bed, or dedicating a moment of contemplation upon waking. This silence acts like a filter. It reduces external noise and leaves space for something internal to manifest. People who report following the voice describe this process as a shift in mindset. They stop chasing immediate answers and learn to welcome impressions, dreams, or subtle suggestions that would previously have gone unnoticed. The impact of this silence isn't always dramatic at first glance, but it paves the way for more coherent, less impulsive decisions. Alongside silence, fasting and prayer emerge as practices that consolidate listening. I'm not talking about rigid formulas here, but about disciplining the body and mind to make room for the transcendent. Fasting, understood as the voluntary renunciation of something that occupies attention, be it food at specific times or a digital habit, creates resistance to immediacy and allows for a different frequency of discernment. Prayer, in turn, organizes intention. It's not just speaking, but aligning the will, asking for clarity, and cultivating humility to accept corrections. In many accounts, these practices appear not as a moral obligation, but as concrete resources for making transformative decisions. When a family decided to set aside 5 minutes of prayer, or when someone chose to fast for a few days before making a professional decision, the result was a change in attitude. Less haste, more care. Small signs are another striking pattern, perhaps the most disconcerting for those seeking logical explanations. They are coincidences that repeat themselves, dreams that return with similar elements, a phrase spoken at the right moment, a chance encounter that opens a door. For many, these clues are the way the invisible communicates in the real world, not with thunder, but with nuances. The difference between calling them mere coincidence or a sign often lies in the collective interpretation and the fruit they produce. If a sign leads to a decision that produces peace, reconciliation, and service to others, it tends to be seen as legitimate. If it leads to pride or division, we must pay close attention. Therefore, small signs are useful, but they need to be evaluated in the context of practical life and the effect they have. Persistence is the fourth element that ties everything together. When something appears once, it's easy to doubt. When it reappears consistently, the sense of urgency that returns, the dream that returns, the same person who appears to advise at decisive moments, the tendency is to consider that there's a pattern here that demands a response. Persistence doesn't mean blind insistence. It means virtuous endurance, continuing sanctifying practices, maintaining humble decisions, and, above all, not abandoning the small acts through which a new routine is built. It's through repetition that the mindset becomes firm and that decisions cease to be sporadic and become a path. Persistence transforms what could have been a flash in the pan into a purposeful journey. If we combine these four elements: fasting, prayer, small signs, and persistence, we begin to see how revelations manifest in practical life. It's not a spectacle, but an architecture of transformation. Silence opens space. Fasting and prayer organize the heart. Signs guide the direction. Persistence solidifies the path. It is in this combination that the hidden truth becomes visible. Through impact, families rebuilding themselves, people finding a new vocation, communities strengthening themselves. Transformation, in this sense, is less about receiving an immediate response and more about developing a mindset capable of sustaining coherent decisions over time. Another aspect that emerges in the accounts is the role of the behind the scenes. What happens when no one is looking is often the most fertile ground for change. Inner work hours of reading, sincere conversations with a confidant, one's own flaws acknowledged in silence is what bears fruit when the moment of decision arises. The revelations that last are not those that shine in public, but those that emerge accompanied by humility and responsibility. Therefore, many witnesses speak of small routines they maintain for years before seeing the visible impact: a discipline of prayer, a habit of generosity, the continual practice of apologizing. The journey, thus, is also a training. There are, of course, pitfalls. The desire for personal advantage can distort the interpretation of signs. The pursuit of notoriety can transform an intimate process into a spectacle. Attachment to immediate results can push people to make reckless decisions. Therefore, collective discernment dialogue with spiritual guides, evaluation of the results. Verification with the community appears as an element of prudence in the stories we hear. Authority does not lie in a single isolated account, but in the convergence of experiences and the testing of the results. When decisions generate more peace, more charity, and more responsibility, the likelihood of them being aligned with something true increases. The internal logic of these patterns also teaches us to evaluate our own choices. What small sacrifices can I make today to improve the quality of my decisions tomorrow? Where can silence be established in my routine so I can hear more clearly? What signs have I been overlooking out of haste or disbelief? The transformation proposed by these accounts is not exotic, it is practical, and its impact is measured. Less in extraordinary events and more in a change of pace, in a new way of approaching relationships and responsibility. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because understanding these patterns gives us tools to discern more accurately and act with more courage. By recognizing the presence of silence, fasting, prayer, small signs, and persistence, we begin to see not just isolated episodes, but a structure that allows someone to make decisions that truly matter. And among these marks, clues to the unrevealed, messages appear. Comment, this makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. And to do so, I invite you to experience with me each of the 7 messages that circulate among the Medjugorje accounts, not as ready-made phrases, but as pulses that touched lives and generated real transformation. Think of them as notes of a melody that, played in sequence, changes mindsets and guides decisions. The first is a call to conversion, not a decorative change, but a reversal of course that asks us to break away from habits that imprison us and choose sincerity. Remember, the family that began praying together again. The conversion there wasn't a show. It was a daily renunciation of pride, a humble gesture that, repeated, changed the tone of conversations and the atmosphere of the home. The second message speaks of constant prayer, the kind that isn't just memorized words, but a presence that organizes the heart. In the accounts, the practice of prayer appears as a thread that rebuilds bonds and provides support in nights of doubt. The third message touches on family protection, but in a concrete way. Care, routines, a discipline of presence that acts as a shield. It's not vague mysticism. It's a practical decision setting aside time, building simple rituals, prioritizing dialogue gestures that, in the case of Anna and the family that saved her home, served as containment in the face of chaos. The fourth message calls for inner vigilance, being attentive to one's own motivations, to the temptations of being distracted by vanity, and maintaining a posture of self-examination. In the accounts, this vigilance appears as a silent framework: hours of reading, confessing mistakes, talking with a counselor that prevents impulsive decisions and protects against misinterpreting signals. The fifth message points to reconciliation, a theme that echoes in the shy embraces that sealed forgiveness and the small phrases that changed destinies. The reconciliation described is practical, apologizing, accepting limits, restoring trust through concrete actions. The sixth message is an invitation to service and charity. Testimonies show that, by responding to a call, many not only received personal benefits but were moved to help others, creating a support network that transformed entire communities. The impact of this service is seen in the initiatives that emerged after losses: community projects, support meetings, exchanges of resources which provided not only comfort but also real opportunities for a new beginning. Finally, the seventh message speaks of inner preparation and vigilance for times of trial. This preparation is not pamphlet. It is an intimate culture, discipline, prayer, fasting, understood as liberating renunciation, and small practices that strengthen character. In many accounts, this preparation manifests as a new sensitivity, a sharper perception of small signs that would previously go unnoticed. It's as if life takes on a new frequency, and those who cultivate it begin to notice subtle steps that could be a path of protection or a warning. By presenting these 7 messages in a sensorial way, it's possible to connect each of them to stories we've already heard: the table gathering that opened a window to reconciliation, conversion, and prayer; the job loss that became the seed for a community service project; loss, rebirth, service, the coincidences, and recurring dreams that served as small signs guiding important decisions, inner vigilance, and preparation. It's not necessary to believe in a supernatural spectacle to realize that there is a pattern in architecture of choices that produces tangible fruits: peace that lingers, relationships repaired, vocations discovered, support networks consolidated. These fruits are the practical criterion many people use to say they were facing something greater than themselves. At the same time, it's crucial to remember that these messages don't work like automatic recipes. Transformation requires intense work behind the scenes, discipline, humility to listen to corrections, courage to lose when necessary, and a mindset that accepts that true impact is built in everyday life, in small acts that no one sees. In every story, There are periods of darkness before the dawn, moments when doubt seems to prevail, when reputation falters, when family suffers. But it is precisely in these fringes, in these seemingly insignificant shortcuts, that change takes hold if decisions are consistent. Observing the narratives with this perspective, we also notice an important detail. The language of the messages is simultaneously symbolic and practical. The talk about fasting, for example, can be understood literally by some, and for others, as a symbolic renunciation, giving up something that steals attention, reducing the noise of social media, reorganizing priorities. Inner vigilance, then, becomes an exercise in self-knowledge, family protection, a set of routine practices, reconciliation, a process that requires time and courage. Each message, therefore, is a behavioral proposal, not just an abstract promise. The hidden truth that many describe is not an unattainable mystery. It is a sum of attitudes that reveal values and choose what deserves a place in life. There are places where these messages have been repeated for decades, where testimonies converge, and where the community creates ways to verify what is genuine. Conversations with mentors, evaluation of the results, and respect for the processes. This collective discernment does not eliminate personal experience, but it offers a check against individual interpretations driven by self-interest or the pursuit of prominence. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because understanding the emotional synthesis of these messages gives us tools to evaluate what emerges in our own journey. Perceiving the intersection between conversion, prayer, protection, vigilance, reconciliation, service, and preparation is to see a map of decisions that can guide daily life. When we return to the stories, we see that action and faith are not opposites. They are pairs that nourish each other. Faith prompts decisions, and decisions nourish faith, generating an impact that changes stories. And, in light of this, an inevitable question arises that stirs our minds and hearts. But how do we know if it's truly a divine calling? Comment: that makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because discerning the true voice, the one that guides without deceiving, that calls without inflaming pride, and that bears fruit is, at its core, a spiritual and practical skill that can be learned, cultivated, and tested within one's own journey of transformation. Discerning is not an uncontrolled mystical leap. It is a discipline that involves mind, heart, and community, a mindset capable of separating genuine insight from selfish desire. First criterion: observe the fruits. Fruits are not spectacular promises, but simple and constant signs. Peace that endures even in the midst of conflict. Charitable actions that arise naturally and not for show. Coherence between word and behavior. When guidance leads to greater inner serenity, more care for others, and more responsibility in decisions, it is very likely aligned with something true. If, on the contrary, it generates confusion, imbalance, division, and pride, it is necessary to step back and reevaluate. This is not an expansive rule. It is a practical and very humble test that many families in the stories applied and found answers to in their daily lives. A second axis of discernment is the guidance of the church and the body of faith to which one belongs. Personal experience is valuable, but community tradition serves as a prudent check against isolated interpretations. Talking to a parish priest, a spiritual director, or someone you trust who has pastoral sensitivity does not weaken the experience. On the contrary, it adds perspective and history. Behind the scenes of the stories we heard, the most confident voices were those who sought counsel, who submitted their impressions to those who accompanied them spiritually, and who accepted corrections. This movement of humility is a key element, recognizing that our perceptions can fail, and therefore, seeking the sovereignty of collective discernment, is a mature way of caring for one's own soul and the community. Consistency with Scripture and fundamental teachings is also a criterion that cannot be ignored. An impression or message that contradicts core values, love, truth, humility, charity immediately loses credibility. When guidance seems to demand something contrary to compassion or justice, we should suspend adherence until further investigation. Hidden truth often does not clash with the foundations of faith, it illuminates them. Therefore, becoming accustomed to confronting any feeling with the word and tradition is an exercise in responsibility that helps filter emotional excesses and sudden impulses. Another practical criterion is consistency over time. Messages or impulses that appear once can be mistaken for fleeting intuitions. But when something returns persistently, when dreams, small signs, and impressions repeat themselves in a pattern that guides prudent decisions, the indication that there is something to consider increases. Persistence does not mean blind insistence. It means that life presents a frequency that deserves attention and that, when subjected to the test of fruits and community guidance, can point in a legitimate direction. In the stories we tell, this repetition was often what gave someone the courage to make a difficult decision, because it was not just an emotional flash, but a sequence that demanded a response. Pastoral prudence also requires attention to the emotional and psychological context. Sometimes, a recent crisis, unresolved trauma, or a desire for sudden change can color internal impressions. Discernment, therefore, requires honesty about our own motives. Am I seeking an authentic calling or an escape from pain? Do I desire protagonism or service? These types of questions, asked courageously, help separate what is the fruit of true transformation from what is a momentary reaction. Practical tools, such as writing down what one perceives, seeking psychological counseling when necessary, and talking to trusted people, are resources that protect one from impulsive decisions. It's also worth highlighting the community's role as a testing ground. When a guideline leads to actions that strengthen the community, increase accountability, and promote charity and reconciliation, this tends to confirm its authenticity. But if it generates exclusion, disputes, and the pursuit of personal advantage, the ink begins to fade. Historically, serious traditions have always prioritized community testing as a way to validate spiritual experiences. This is a practical lesson that emerges in the accounts of Medjugorje. The voices that produced common good and service practices were those that most withstood scrutiny. Furthermore, discernment involves a dimension of patience and time. Not every answer needs to be immediate. Sometimes the wise decision is to wait, cultivate silence and fasting, and continue observing the signs. Haste often favors misinterpretations. Patience, on the other hand, allows the truth to reveal itself at its own pace. This patience is not passivity, but an active discipline, praying, fasting, seeking counsel, maintaining character-building habits, and waiting for the fruits to manifest. In the stories we heard, decisions made calmly, after a period of testing, were those that brought the least regret and the most impact. Finally, there is an element of ethical responsibility. Any guidance that demands something that violates human dignity, encourages harm to others, or promises advantage through manipulation must be rejected immediately. Faith that edifies does not oppress. The hidden truth will never demand behavior that disrespects the law, reason, or fraternal coexistence. This moral filter is non-negotiable and, when applied, protects against deception and abuse. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because discernment is, above all, learning to unite faith and reason, heart and community, sensitivity and prudence. It's cultivating a mindset of responsible decision-making that recognizes signs without giving in to fantasy, that accepts risks without abandoning solid criteria, and that seeks real impact for the common good. When these criteria are applied, the perceived voice gains practical credibility. It produces peace, generates charity, strengthens homes, and guides coherent choices. And when someone follows this discernment, what changes in practice are habits, priorities, and the way they live their faith in their daily lives, a change that is slow, concrete, and transformative. Comment: I'm on this journey too. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, and I want you to see clearly how what begins as intuition or an impression translates into concrete changes within routine, small revolutions that happen in the silence of the home, in everyday gestures, in the way someone looks at another after a genuine conversation. Imagine the scene: a brightly lit room in the morning, the table still with warm bread, the soft sound of barely noticeable music in the background, and, amidst this domesticated silence, people who choose by simple decision to dedicate 5 minutes to prayer. It's not a spectacle, it's discipline. And it is from this discipline that tangible transformations are born. Rearranged priorities, redirected time, choices made not by the urgency of the day, but by the new scale of values that has been built. The practical impact on daily life is evident in routines that take on a different meaning. Waking up 10 minutes earlier to meditate, turning off your cell phone during meals, setting aside one night a week to listen to your loved ones. All of this affects the fabric of relationships. In that family's story, the table that was once used only for meals became an altar of dialogue. And the difference isn't poetic. These are decisions that reduce contentiousness, that reduce misunderstandings, and that, over time, build trust. In the mental images we follow, we see hands touching an apology, glances softening, phone calls answered with more patience. These small acts accumulate and produce a profound impact. Relationships that were prone to wear and tear now have mechanisms for regeneration. The transformation also manifests itself in priorities. There are reports of people who, after feeling this calling, reorganized their entire schedules. A professional who previously accepted any job to fill time decided to reject anything that distanced him from his core values. A mother who felt guilty about not having time chose to delegate tasks and spend more time with her children. A young man seeking social approval realized that what mattered was the service he could offer the community. These decisions don't occur in a vacuum. They are the result of a shift in mindset that prioritizes the essential over the superfluous. And the results are visible: less anxiety, more meaning, and a direct impact on quality of life. Acts of charity and service appear repeatedly in narratives as natural effects of those who respond to the voice. These aren't grandiose programs in mainstream media. They're everyday gestures, preparing a meal for a neighbor in need, accompanying someone to a doctor's appointment, organizing a support group when a family suffers a loss. What's striking is that these acts, taken together, form a safety net that no one had centrally planned. It's the cumulative effect of individual decisions that create a collective good. When the community feels cared for, the feeling of inner protection transforms into practical protection. People help each other, share resources, and this reduces real vulnerabilities. Restoring homes, perhaps one of the most sensitive impacts, reported, usually involves simple, repeated rituals. Sitting down to listen, avoiding automatic responses, practicing forgiveness in concrete phrases, and apologizing when necessary. It's common to hear that there was no magic solution, but that patience and consistency shaped a new pattern. This pattern translates into domestic gestures that govern daily life. Return times, attention to emotional needs, presence at mealtimes, and a commitment to not leaving wounds unattended. In the mental audio of the stories, we realize that the families that reorganized themselves maintained habits that served as cement for the new relational structure. Another practical aspect is the reorganization of time and resources. People who decided to follow a voice perceived as authentic began to allocate part of their resources to what they considered a priority: spiritual formation, support for local social projects, investment in family relationships. This deliberate allocation generates a direct impact: greater emotional stability, less dispersion, and a sense of purpose that guides economic and emotional decisions. Financial transformation, when it occurs, does not necessarily mean immediate prosperity, but rather management more aligned with values, which reduces waste and increases the ability to support others. The effect on behavior also appears in reactions to conflict. Where there were once outbursts and accusations, pauses emerge that allow for listening. Where there were automatic responses, a filter emerges that asks questions before reacting. This filter is the result of an inner discipline built through the practice of prayer, symbolic fasting, and the silence we mentioned earlier. It changes daily dynamics: less weariness, less resentment, and more space for rebuilding. There is a real emotional impact. People report less insomnia, less uncontrolled urgency, and greater clarity in decision-making. The journey, then, changes. Not only the exterior, but also the interior. The mind and heart begin to function at a different cadence. There are also unexpected effects. Opportunities that arise because the person is more present, connections that are recultivated, emotional health that recovers when the rhythm of life is reorganized. These results are neither guaranteed nor automatic, but they appear frequently enough in the reports to be considered signs that the practice brings returns. It's not a shortcut to a pain-free life, but a shift in mindset that guides decisions and reduces exposure to disruptions. The hidden truth, then, manifests itself as an impact that touches routine, character, and relationships. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because understanding the practical impact is understanding that faith, when tested, transforms habits and reshapes destinies. Decisions that begin in private, getting up a little earlier, saying a word of forgiveness, prioritizing a family meal emerge and generate tangible consequences. And even when the loss is real, when the cost is high, experience shows that well-guided sacrifices can open the way for a more meaningful new beginning. But these decisions also bring opposition and trials. Comment: I'm on this journey too. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. Because where there is true transformation, there is also testing, and many of the stories we hear involve painful conflicts. Following a voice perceived as divine often triggers intense reactions from those around us, disbelief from family members who feel betrayed by the new rhythm, material losses that test patience and faith, and even social persecution ranging from malicious comments to exclusion from previously friendly circles. It's common for those who make decisions guided by this perception to face laughter, pitying looks, or accusations of delusion. There are reports of people losing contracts, being fired, having partnerships dissolved, and, in some cases, being subjected to rumors that tarnished hard-earned reputations. These tests don't happen by chance. They often arise as a natural resistance of the world to any change that challenges an established mindset. And it is precisely in this friction between the call and the social reaction that character is revealed. I remember a voice telling me, with a hushed breath, about sleepless nights brought on by worrying about bills and the way people look at me. I almost gave up, but I didn't. This short, blunt phrase sums up the experience of many. The temptation to return to what was safe is strong, but the insistence on following a path perceived as true ends up shaping the inner self. The test, then, acts as a litmus test that separates momentary impulse from lasting commitment. Losing something: a job, prestige, friendships can hurt deeply, and there is no shortcut to grieving these losses. But those who persisted report that, over time, they learned to distinguish between what was essential and what was merely superficial. The transformation that occurs in these episodes is twofold: external, because circumstances change, and internal, because the mindset is reconstructed in the face of reality. There is also a darker side to trials, the manipulation and abuse that can arise when leaders or mentors exploit the faith of others. Therefore, the most inspiring stories are those accompanied by community discernment and pastoral responsibility. People who sought counsel presented their impressions to reputable spiritual guides and underwent a process of verification, generally emerged less vulnerable to rash decisions or leaders with dubious intentions. Hidden truth, when genuine, does not require isolation or permanent secrecy. It requires responsible integration with a community that helps evaluate its fruits and effects. Facing opposition without support is always riskier. Facing opposition with a network of discernment is often what transforms trials into revelation. The stories we hear: social persecution takes various forms. Some were ridiculed on social media, others lost invitations to professional events, and in some cases, family groups grew apart. These reactions not only test faith, but also reveal the social toll of choices that deviate from consensus. Still, many people report that the experience of being the target of criticism ended up strengthening their bonds with those who remained. True friends emerged. Supportive communities, people who, instead of judging, reached out. The loss of a superficial crowd, in these accounts, acted as a filter. It removed companions who offered little and left room for more authentic relationships. The psychological dimension of these trials deserves attention. Doubts, guilt, and fear can intensify, which is why it's vital that those going through these phases seek support not only spiritually, but also psychologically when necessary. Healthy discernment involves checking one's emotional health, identifying unresolved traumas, and separating personal reactions from possible genuine inspirations. In several narratives, seeking professional help was a turning point. By addressing internal issues, the person became better able to evaluate signs and make decisions with less risk of emotional projection. The spiritual journey, then, runs hand in hand with the journey of self-discovery. The behind-the-scenes transformation includes therapy, frank conversations, and a lot of self-honesty. Faith, when tested, can emerge stronger, and this is not contradictory to suffering. On the contrary, trials, when faced with prudence, often reveal inner reserves of courage and resilience that previously seemed small or non-existent. People who have experienced social rejection, professional losses, or family criticism often report a new inner robustness, a confidence less dependent on external confirmation and more anchored in concrete experiences of peace and service. This shift in mindset, the ability to bear the cost of conviction, is for many the most valuable outcome. It doesn't eliminate pain, but transforms it into raw material for growth. Another recurring theme is the impact trials have on the community. While some episodes can create divisions, others encourage a rethinking of collective values. In places where the practice of prayer, fasting, and service was valued, the response to hardship tended to be more collaborative. Neighbors helping, with food groups organizing temporary financial support, spiritual leaders offering guidance and support. The safety net that emerges in these contexts isn't magical. It's the result of repeated decisions by people who choose to care for one another. The practical impact is visible. Homes that would have collapsed with loss find support, and the trial, in this case, acts as a catalyst for community organizing and outpourings of generosity. But trials don't always bring immediate reinforcement. There are cases where persecution was so intense that the person had to return to more discreet roots, rebuild their lives step by step, and accept that some dreams would have to be postponed. Yet, even on these journeys, many emphasize that something essential has changed. The mindset toward pain and uncertainty has changed, less driven by fear and more inclined toward practical trust, small decisions that prioritize peace and service and that, over time, generate impact. The hidden truth, in these scenarios, is not a guarantee of instant protection. It is an invitation to a journey where meaning is built on persistence and integrity. The stories of conflict and trial we hear, therefore, have a pedagogical element. They teach that transformation entails a cost, that the mindset needs to be trained to sustain decisions, and that perseverance, when aligned with healthy criteria of discernment, produces fruits that justify the risk. There is no romanticization of suffering here. There is recognition that the journey can hurt, but also heal. And when faith is tested and endures, it often reveals itself to be more mature, more practical, and more capable of generating real impact on the lives around us. What legacy do these stories leave us? Comment. This makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, and begin by reminding you that these stories aren't just fodder for curiosity. They are invitations knocking on the door of our lives and demanding a response. When someone describes with a trembling voice the feeling of having heard guidance, when another tells how a simple practice of fasting in silence changed the dynamics of their home, We are faced with stories that demand a personal decision, not an uncritical acceptance, but an active responsibility. The reflective conclusion we reach isn't short-sighted. It connects emotion and purpose, and shows that real transformation has a face, a cost, and consequences. This is the hidden truth that emerges from behind the scenes of these narratives. There are no shortcuts to meaningful change. There are journeys that require discipline, humility, and courage to make decisions that reshape mindsets and produce concrete impact. Look at what we've seen. Families who rediscovered prayer as a priority. People who, by choosing small sacrifices, built a much more solid protective field than they expected. This effect doesn't happen overnight. It's born from the repetition of simple acts, from patience behind the scenes. The hope we embody here isn't naive optimism, but a confidence forged through testing. It's the fruit of lives that have experienced loss, new beginnings, and trials, and that have discovered, amidst the pain, a new form of meaning. Therefore, speaking of hope is also speaking of responsibility, discerning, acting, and standing firm when the world pressures us to return to the familiar. Discerning, as we've already discussed, is uniting faith and reason, heart and practice. It's not closing our eyes, it's looking carefully at the fruits. When peace increases, when service to others becomes natural, when the mind assumes a new hierarchy of values, these are signs that something real is happening. And this reality has practical effects: reorganization of time, shifting priorities, new routines that protect the home and strengthen the community. Transformation is seen in seemingly small things: a family dinner, without electronic distractions, a conversation that replaces an aggressive response, a gesture of compassion, made without fanfare, and the impact, over time, is extraordinary. This is the practical nature of tested faith. It changes habits, and habits change destinies. At the same time, the call to hope does not minimize the trials. Recognizing the cost is part of pastoral and human care. Those who embark on a journey of authentic faith need to know that there will be opposition, that decisions may involve material losses, and that reputations will sometimes be challenged. But the narratives that touch us most show that, even in the face of these costs, many have found a new foundation, a mindset that doesn't depend on applause, a courage that faces fear and transforms pain into raw material for reconstruction. The transformation that arises from this process doesn't erase the scars, but rather alters the meaning we give them. It ceases to be a wound that paralyzes us and becomes a testimony that guides future choices. There is also a community dimension worth highlighting. The message of care and service that appears in so many stories does not belong to an isolated individual. It flourishes when the community decides to act together. Support projects, community outreach, shared meals, networks of presence. Of these are practical impacts born from the sum of small personal decisions. The protection that many report experiencing does not fall from the sky like a magical cloak. It is built by hands that choose to help, by hearts that prefer service to selfishness, by a collective mindset that values the dignity of others. This is where the hidden truth translates into social transformation, not just families saved individually, but more resilient communities. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject and point out what each viewer can do with this knowledge. First, cultivate intentional silence. This isn't about esotericism, but about creating space to listen without the constant pollution of screens and urgency. Second, experiment with fasting, practices that free the mind from the immediate and create a new frequency of decision-making. Third, subject perceptions to the test of fruits and the advice of trusted people. Seeking guidance doesn't weaken the experience, it protects it. Fourth, invest in concrete actions of service. The impact is proven more in daily life than in fine words. These aren't magic recipes, but practical paths that, combined, produce a mindset capable of sustaining major decisions. It's also worth remembering that the journey requires behind-the-scenes work: reading, reflection, pastoral accompaniment, and, when necessary, psychological care. The integration of these spheres, spiritual, community, and emotional, is what prevents hasty interpretations and protects against opportunistic leaders. Mature faith, in the stories we heard, has always been accompanied by prudence and responsibility. And it is this integrity that allows the hidden truth to cease being an enigma and become a criterion for living better, more serene, more coherent, more active in the common good. The legacy of these stories, therefore, is both personal and collective. They invite us to reassess our priorities, adopt a new mindset that values what is essential, and make decisions that can protect what we love most. It's not a call to isolation, nor a promise of pain-free lives. It's an invitation to embark on a journey where faith is tested and manifested in acts of love and service. By recognizing this, each person can discern, respond according to their conscience, and, if they choose to act, make an impact that extends beyond their immediate circle. As you absorb all this, realize the power of human testimony. It's not rhetoric, it's real life. It's not a spectacle, it's daily work. And that's precisely why there's hope, because true transformation is made of repeated steps, not quick fixes. With this perspective, the question that follows isn't merely theoretical, it's practical, intimate, and challenging. And it's with this same attention that we move forward, exploring how these choices translate into routines, decisions, and concrete attitudes that shape destinies. Comment: I'm on this journey too. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. Carefully, it means a lot. If this story touched you, write "I'm with you" until the end below, so I know who's coming along on this journey. I'll read every comment with care. If you want to continue receiving real stories, careful analyses, and practical tools for discernment and transformation, subscribe to the channel. That's how I can bring you more content like this and keep this conversation alive. If this video touched your heart in any way, leave a like. It's a simple gesture that shows the content was valuable and helps others find these stories. There's a video here that complements this topic and delves deeper into the message about family protection. Click and stay with me there. I look forward to seeing you as we continue together in this search for clarity, courage, and real change.